What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Kamen Rider Build episode 10. This episode is called Technology of Destruction. It was a really good episode. So what ends up happening is it's a continuation of the last episode, which is fine. It was actually perfectly fine. It worked out really well. What ends up happening is that, as we know, there was a whole discussion before about, Ryoga and him wanting to better, and him having negative feelings about Sento or whatever, but learning obviously from Mizora about how much he really cares about him, and also about the power of science, of course. So this one kind of explains all that, and eventually it brings Ryoga into helping out because there's attacks going on at the lab at the Toto Institute, and so Ryoga is called by Sento to go down there and help out. So in the meantime, we end up seeing also the prime ministers from the three different, capitals. And, what happens is that they come out, we see all three of them, they use these card keys which allow them to access the Pandora's box. So each one of the prime ministers has one of them, which is interesting. That's actually kind of a unique way of doing things. And they end up unlocking it, but then when they unlock it, suddenly an alarm goes off, and also a whole force field goes up, basically trapping them inside of it and keeping them captive. And then at that point we end up seeing Bloodstark with a whole bunch of guardians, and they end up attacking different people and putting them out. And then at one point what happens is that the Total Special Forces team comes out to attack Bloodstark and the Guardians. And when they think that the Guardians are going to be good, because they're technically were the main force against criminals and everything, and they thought, oh, this is our protection service. Suddenly Bloodstark snaps, and then at that point they begin to attack the special forces. So they're like, why are they attacking? And what we end up hearing, which is something that's really interesting, is we have a whole explanation that carries out between Nanba and Sawa, and it basically explains something really key and important to the overall story. And this is basically what it is. It says, like, the Guardians were made by FEWZ and were created to obey FEWZ when the right signal was given, such as like a snap. And they were originally meant to kill criminals and end crime. But the thing is that the Toto government has no control, since they didn't actually develop the Guardians, and so basically they can't command them in that same way. They've been acting like helpers to Toto, but in reality they have no real power. As long as you are given the right signal, they could be turned against you very easily. So then the other explanation is, once the Pandora's box is stolen, that Hokuto and Saito, which are the two other capitals other than Totoro, will want accountability, meaning like they'll want to make sure that things are dealt with, and that they, in case any war or conflict happens, they want to be prepared. And the thing is that Nanba's whole thought was that, Totoro, being a nation that's meant to be very pacifist, because the prime minister, who's like Gentaku's who's Gentaku's father or whatever, is really just a peaceful guy. But Gentaku and all of us is more of, a much more dark and much more military-esque group. And the thing is that the whole point being that this will cause them to have to, that if they start to prepare for war, and this all ends up happening, eventually they'll have to adopt the Kamen Rider system, which will lead to that being used and a lot more conflicts occurring, but them getting ahead of the system being utilized by a government. So it's really interesting, and yeah, that was that whole point, and it actually is really important to note that. I mean, that's actually really, really like core, because that's one of the things that we've been kind of getting little bits of information over time about the prime ministers and all that, and like, you know, the fact that they're really significant to this story, but like this really says a whole lot. So then I forgot. Something I also want to say. Following this, what do you call it? Bloodstark does show up with the Guardians at where the Prime Ministers are, since they're all trapped there. You know, they're basically stalling, and then what happens is that we end up seeing Ryoga show up, which he decides to take one of the special forces outfits so that he can disguise himself and sneak in. So then what happens is that Bloodstark does end up stealing the Pandora's box, and eventually Ryoga appears, and he ends up using the bottle, shaking it, of course, and then runs in to beat on Bloodstark, but then Bloodstark ends up turning the one guy that was, there was two guys that were helping in the last episode, but there was one that ended up, basically dying, or, having his essence drained from him. Well, actually, no, he did die, but the other one didn't, and he was helping out. And the thing is that he has a bloodstream, a gas stream attack done on him from Bloodstark, which turns him into the press smash hazard mode, which is important because the other guy had the strong smash hazard mode. This is the press smash hazard mode, meaning that obviously they're much more powerful. And the thing is that that's true, but Ryoga ends up fighting that guy. And in the meantime, we also see that during the time that Bloodstark steals the Pandora's box, he actually shoots out all the cameras, including the one that Gentaku was looking at. So he kind of was very suspicious as to why he knocked out that camera, because that definitely meant something. Why would he knock out the camera that his associate is viewing from? So definitely brings up a lot of points. And again, throughout this show, we've already seen a number of times that Gentaku and Bloodstark seem to kind of clash a bunch, and it seems like Bloodstark isn't really necessarily completely on Gentaku's side. There's clearly a division going on where they're not fully connected to each other. They have differences of opinions, and they seem to have their own motives. It's just Bloodstark's motives are a little bit more unclear overall, as opposed to Gentaku's. So additionally, what ends up happening is, as I said before, Ryoga ends up fighting the press smash or whatever, and in the meantime, we end up seeing Bloodstark go out on top of the building, and he ends up meeting up with Gentaku, who's kind of annoyed at him because he went the way that he wasn't supposed to exit the building. And so that leads to Gentaku transforming into Night Rogue, and he ends up, and they end up having a fight together. And at one point, Ryoga shows up, and he says that he had destroyed the press smash. Well, he didn't destroy him; he just beat him up to the point that he couldn't keep fighting, which. Bloodstark was surprised because he says, no human should be able to to defeat a smash, which really shows how strong he's gotten. And that's further explained a little bit later, because what ends up happening is that at one point Ryoga ends up getting attacked, and then suddenly Sento appears in Hawk-Gatling mode, in the Hawk-Gatling combination, fights them, and we end up seeing him fight Night Rogue. In the meantime, Bloodstark ends up fighting Ryoga, and eventually, when Bloodstark is fighting Ryoga starts doing all these punches with the Dragon Ball and everything, and eventually it gets so strong that he's actually hurting Bloodstark, because you have to remember, as a rider, he's supposed to be pretty strong. A normal human shouldn't be able to actually really do much damage to him. So the fact that Bloodstark, and again, we don't know what Bloodstark is, if he's considered really a rider or what right now. I mean, he's going to end up being it eventually. That's pretty obvious. But they don't like refer to him as Kamen Rider Bloodstark. They just refer to him as Bloodstark, for example. Same with Night Rogue. They don't refer to him as Kamen Rider, Night Rogue. They will refer to him as Kamen Rider Rogue eventually. But as far as Stark goes, no. That if he's getting a rider name, it's going to be something different, which we already have an idea of what it might be. We don't have like entire confirmation. So additionally, what ends up happening is that they end up fighting, and at one point, Ryoga ends up doing an attack, which leads to Bloodstark realizing that his powers increase, and he's actually at the point where he's awakened, meaning that he's reached that 3.0 marker that allows him to transform, which we won't be seeing until next episode, but it's still really good. That will be when he's introduced as Kamen Rider Cross Z, which is exciting to see that. And believe me, he looks like Cross Z looks amazing. I can't wait to see how he is implemented into the show. So additionally, what ends up happening is that they end up fighting. Eventually, Sento ends up using Fire Hedgehog, which he actually uses the Hedgehog a little bit more this time, which he doesn't really do in the past. He's done the fire stuff where he's done like the ladder and also the sporting of the fire, but not really the quills from like the hedgehog, which is interesting. Additionally, he also uses Lion Vacuum, which is cool to see that also utilized again. And then at one point, what happens is that Gentaku gets into a situation where he's able to fight back, and he ends up knocking Sento over, and all the bottles that he had fall out. So all like the best matches that he has on him that he uses regularly aren't within his grasp, and suddenly he tries to battle with Gentaku, but eventually, which he's Night Rogue right now. He ends up Night Rogue takes a panel from the Pandora's box and starts putting the different all the bottles in their best matches onto the panel, and the only ones that Sento ends up having in the end are Rapid Tank and a lock bottle. So actually, I don't even think he has the lock bottle at that point. He might though. Anyway, Gentaku also mentions, so this is the one that you use to get rid of his girl back then. Remember? It takes me back, and he tries to really make him feel terrible and really aggravate him, and eventually, Ryoga realizes how much Sento really cares, and the fact that he should believe in him and everything. And at that point, the dragon that he had made for him. He ends up giving it the dragon bottle, and at that point, the little dragon ends up attacking Night Rogue, and then what happens is that he throws him the dragon bottle and the lock bottle, and he ends up putting them inside of of his driver, and he transforms into he ends up doing the best match, which is Key Dragon, which that leads to him actually having a best match other than his basic form, which is good. And it's a really, really awesome form. They end up fighting for a while, and eventually what ends up happening is that Night Rogue does get away, and eventually Bloodstark does too. But what we also see is later on that Sento goes after Bloodstark to find out what's going on there, and also Night Rogue. But they end up. He ends up going somewhere, and we end up seeing the press smash appear, the one that Ryoga attacked, and he ends up using the gas break, which breaks the smash form, and this leads to him to the guy under the smash form saying, "You're Takumi Katsuragi," and he says that he's dead, and then Bloodstark says Takumi Kazumi is dead. Katsuragi is dead, but the way he says it kind of hints at him being hesitant to respond. And what this leads to eventually is that the guy says, "I'm sure with you being so brilliant, it must have been very easy for you to just fake your death and, take another form." And he says, "Like this," and suddenly Bloodstark goes out and he puts his hand on the guy's face, and it changes his face to the guy that was killed in the last episode, meaning that that probably is what happened. Something along those lines probably happened to Katsuragi, which helps a lot because that gives a little bit more clarity that yes, this has to be him, or if not, it would have to be someone. Who else would it be? So then at that point, Sento ends up going out using his bike. He ends up attacking the tank form that comes from the Guardians coming together, and suddenly Bloodstark falls off, and we end up seeing Bill talking to Bloodstark about whether or not he's Katsuragi, and he explains that the whole rider system was meant to be for blood and war and conflict rather than for science and everything, and yet Sento constantly brings up the fact that you thought you were all about science and you wanted to do things right by the world. What changed? And they have this whole discussion, and it's clear that he's probably Katsuragi, and they don't definitely say it yet, and again, we haven't seen the human form of him. We haven't seen him remove his transformation yet, which is still kind of why is that the case? And his voice doesn't sound anything like Katsuragi, so it's still kind of is it Katsuragi? I don't want to say 100% no questions asked, but it is something to kind of note. So anyway, from there, we end up also seeing that the Prime Minister ends up having a heart attack, and eventually, again, after Gentaku ends up... Sento gets knocked out by Night Rogue, and then he steals the leftover bottles that he has. So he has no rabbit or tank or lock bottles, and then at that point, we end up seeing Gentaku show up where the Prime Minister is, and it turns out that the Prime Minister puts Gentaku in charge because he has no idea who Gentaku really is. And at that point, we end up seeing Gentaku secretly get really excited because, he has all the power of Totoro now, which means he can, take over it. He's in charge of FEWZ pretty much, at least that's what it seems, other than Bloodstark. So that's a big deal, and that means that that whole point about what Namba said could just as easily happen now. That's what will probably happen. Now, as for the preview goes, what we did see in the preview is the Kamen Rider Cross Z, so that will be exciting because, as we know, Sento doesn't have any bottles right now. Now, does that mean that he doesn't have any bottles at all? Of course not. But obviously, this next episode will be focused a lot more on him finally using his new form, so that will be really cool. Finally being able to transform, which is interesting because the way that he transforms is that they basically use the same belt that Build had. Just what they do is that the dragon basically collapses in, and then you insert bottles into that, and the dragon collapses in, and then it inserts on the actual driver itself. So that's how they differentiate it from it just being him transforming into Build, for example. So that's how they kind of separate the two, which is good. I love to know your opinions, though. What did you guys think? I know this episode review is a little bit longer just because there was a lot of content in it. I wasn't expecting this review to be as long as it was. But I just wanted to ask you guys, what did you guys think? Are you excited now? Are you looking forward to next episode when we finally get to see Cross Z? I'm really excited for that because I just can't wait to get a second good rider. And when we get to finally see them fighting alongside each other, that would be great. So yeah, I'd love to know your opinions. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you guys think. I hope to see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Sarah saying 1, and goodbye, guys.